Yeah, we are now live, and I want to welcome everybody to the first session of the 2026 European Association Summer School. My name is Carola Dillenberger. I'm the president of the European Association at the moment, and I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Maggie Hoerger. Maggie is a consultant behavior analyst with over 30 years experience applying behavior science across education, health, and organizational settings. She taught and led master's programs in EABA and positive behavior support at Bangor University in Wales for 25 years before recently leaving academia to practice full-time. She's currently the chief behavior scientist at Lux Consulting, where she supports behavior science in diverse industries through organizational and behavior management. Alongside this role, she works closely with practitioners across North Wales to support high-quality ABA and PBS within multidisciplinary teams. Maggie has published extensively on embedding behavior science in complex systems and is president of the UK Society for Behavior Analysis. It is an absolute pleasure, Maggie, to introduce you and hand you over to start your talk. I'm going to leave the presentation. I'll be here in the background if you need anybody.
Thank you so much, Carola. Okay, hello. Thank you for joining me today. I am going to speak with you today about the process we've been through in the United Kingdom to establish behavior analysis as a recognized profession and to set standards. And the emphasis of my talk today is really going to be on context and the importance of the UK context in how we set our standards. Okay, so as Carola mentioned, I have I have a broad overview of behavior analysis in the UK. So I am currently the president of the UK Society for Behavior Analysis, and I'll talk more about that later in the talk. I taught ABA and PBS for 25 years at Bangor University, and I practice with children and young people and in organization and behavior management. So as I've recently left the uni, I have a really broad overview of behavior analysis in the United Kingdom. And I'm passionate. I know I sound like I am from the United States, and that's because that's where I grew up. But I've lived in North Wales and the UK for over 25 years and just have a very persistent accent. Okay, so the focus of my talk today, I'm going to give you some of the cultural context for behavior analysis in the UK, the development of ABA as a professional body, the UK-SBA, defining our professional standards, and then how we went about getting recognized in terms of a professional regulation, and why I think professional regulation is by far and away the most important thing we can be doing to grow our field and to preserve the legacy and the science of behavior analysis. Okay, so ABA in the UK has a pretty great history. We can, in the 1963, we get the first experimental analysis of UK group. There's lots of photos of behavior analysts in the day spending time with Skinner, and this was in the 1960s, like it was in many places, very much experimental behavior analysis. Okay. It was some really early work in the UK around developmental psychology merging with behavior analysis. And perhaps less emphasis on some of the animal models and some more early translational work. That led us to, in 2003, being in a really good position when we were ready to start offering BACB verified course sequences. This was really exciting at the time because, you know, behavior analysis was growing in the United States. We had the development of the BACB as an international body to certify, and we started teaching those courses in 2003, and that was huge, right? So I was teaching on those first cohorts, and we we started thinking, oh, maybe we get a few students to come along and we'll teach this part-time course, and maybe, every couple of years we'll get cohorts. And very quickly the demand for the courses grew, right? And so the students that we were training were going out and working in service and setting themselves up as practitioners, and growing the demand and the interest in behavior analysis. People were becoming certified, and we had this really intense period of growth. Okay. In behavior analysis, and over time, 5 universities became verified course sequences with the BACB. In 2013, we very convivially at one of these EBAG meetings decided to put together a voluntary body for professional regulation. And I'm going to be completely honest with you, in the early days, it was sort of fun. It was nice to have. Okay, so we had the BACB. The BACB is setting up our standards. They're giving us curriculum standards. They're defining the ethics code. They're doing all the work of the professional regulation. And at that point, we had been really building that BAC brand in the UK, right, for 10 years. So there wasn't any urgent incentive to move away from the BACB, but we also were creating a voluntary body and a voluntary register. So people could sign up with the UK-SBA and agree to a UK specific ethics code. But I'll be honest with you, we didn't move fast. Okay, we didn't move fast. Everyone is volunteer. Everyone is still a volunteer, and we established just brought the field together, and it was more of a professional society, if I'm honest, than a body seriously looking at professional regulation. And this was in part because there weren't very many pathways to professional regulation available to behavior analysts in 2013. Okay. In 2020, lots of behavior analysts who were around at the time, especially outside of North America, will remember that the BACB set an announcement. It was on a wild day. Maybe it was like New Year's Eve or something. It was a holiday in the UK. That's what I remember. It was a day that most people don't work and most people don't check their emails. And we had this announcement from the BACB telling us that in 2002, they would no longer be overseeing practitioner or certifying people outside of North America. And let me tell you, at the UK-SBA, we had lots of chats then, and we had to sort of move from being a rather convivial professional body to a group who were looking at certification very, very quickly. And that's what I want to really talk to you today, is about that sort of path we've taken from 2020 to suddenly urgently needing a professional regulation quite urgently, to January of this year, 2026, when we really accepted that full responsibility for certifying professionals. And it looks really different. I'm enormously proud of this piece of work, and I want to take you through why it's been really lucky. Okay, so it's been great. It's been very, very good for us to have to stand on our own feet and to think about what is behavior analysis in the UK context. So if you're not in the UK, I totally appreciate this might not be a direct, you might not generalize directly from our exact practice, but I'm hoping that some of the issues that we face might be interesting to other people, and especially other groups that are still looking towards professional regulation, some of the considerations that we've made. Okay, so practice of ABA in the UK looks really different than it does in North America. Okay, so if we think about where are the jobs and where are people working, the growth of behavior analysis in the UK, where there's really lots of jobs and high demand, is in adult health and social care. Okay, most of those are practicing under the heading of positive behavior support. Okay, when people say ABA, they think about early intensive behavior interventions for young kids with autism. Okay, in fact, early intensive behavior interventions for autistic people is far less prevalent in the UK than it is in North America. In fact, I will go as far to say I don't have evidence for this, but anecdotally, and I remember I've got a really big view on the field, this is decreasing. Okay, so demand for early intervention for autistic children in the UK is decreasing, while we're getting this sort of exponential growth in areas of adult health and social care, challenging behavior, and schools. Okay, and this is really relevant because if we look at lots of the other professional qualifications out there, we look at the BACB, we look at the QABF, we look at the IBO, these are all very much focused on autism intervention. And that is not the situation that we are facing in the United Kingdom right now. And in fact, where publicly funded early intervention exists, this provision is still often secured through parental advocacy and legal proceedings. And I'll talk a bit more about why this is. And Mickey Keenan and Carla Dillenberger, who you just saw, have published really elegantly about this in numerous journals. Okay, so what are the barriers to ABA in the United Kingdom? Okay, so I would say the primary barrier is going to be structural and financial. Okay, so by structural and financial, the UK right now publicly funds health and education. So people don't generally use private insurance for this. These are all publicly funded. The NHS pays for health care, and local governments, local authorities have budgets that they distribute for education. Like what people are seeing in other places, there's been a huge rapid increase in diagnosis of neurodiversity and learning disabilities in the United Kingdom. And we're seeing a huge increase in demand for special education provision. And while that would sound like that should be really great for growing our field and for sharing our science with people, it's also placing a lot of financial constraints. Okay, so that we have an article down here. So this is one local authority, Kent, are overspending in their special education provision by 136 million pounds a year. So ABA is expensive, right? ABA is expensive, especially for very young kids. Structural problems we have in the UK is that the average age for diagnosis of autism is 7. In fact, that's what it was a couple years ago. It might be even higher now. So we're not seeing children getting diagnosed when they're 2 or 3 and looking for support. That diagnosis is often being delayed. And then there's cultural barriers, right? So we have cultural barriers of parents not necessarily culturally. This isn't universal, right? There's absolutely lots of parents who advocate, but that's less common. A lot of the cultural expectation around special education in the United Kingdom sometimes comes down to more of a wait and see, right? Let's wait and see if the child outgrows this. There's also, and I can say this because I'm American and I'm British. There's differences, I think, in how people perceive the benefits of early intervention, right? So I think if we're looking in this North American context, there's this sort of belief that we're going to work really hard with these kids, and we're going to see these amazing outcomes. And I think maybe that's just not as embedded in the UK cultural expectation. And I would think that it's almost antithetical that you would work with a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old child for 30 to 40 hours a week. Okay, so that people are uncomfortable with that idea culturally. And the final barrier is ideological. So the neurodiversity movement has been very intense in its criticism of applied behavior analysis, and they've often had a lot of traction. Okay, so this is an example up here of a party, a political party in Scotland. They weren't the majority party, but they also weren't the only minority party who at the time voted to ban what they call behavior modification practices for disabled people. So this was ABA, it was applications of positive behavior support. We know as behavior analysts that certainly there is bad practice in ABA, but by and large, practice is affirmative and brilliant. I'm going to talk more about that later on. But I think when you combine the sort of cultural, structural, financial issues with ideological issues, we see that people who pay for these services are finding plenty of reason not to pay for them. Okay, so what we don't have in the United Kingdom, which you do have in North America, and there's some more, it's a bit easier in Norway, I know, is a cultural mandate for ABA provision. We just don't have it. Okay, there is nowhere that says, oh yeah, you must get ABA. It's just marvelous. It's for everybody. It doesn't exist. Okay, and I've been around for a while and I've been paying attention. And it's just important that we notice the contingencies, right? Because for many years, the BACB came out, we studied our ABA, we really love our ABA, we're working really hard, we know that we believe our practice is ethical and reflective and compassionate, and why doesn't everybody love it, right? The kids who experience ABA make really great gains. The people we work with like us a lot. Why are we not growing at this rapid rate? And I think what we had to acknowledge, and this is hard for behavior analysts, we don't like this, this makes us very uncomfortable. We're not convincing anybody with our data. They just don't care about our data, and by they I mean the funders. Okay, and the way that's structured in the UK is often people who work in the local health authority or in local government. We show them our graphs. Look at the progress, look at the progress, look at our cumulative graphs. Wow, have you seen the difference in IQ measures between this group and that group? You can't compete with it. They're just not impressed by our data. And for many years, we really led with our data. Like, our data is beautiful. Why don't you love our data? Good, you see how great it is. We're so good at collecting it and graphing it, and it's great. And there's a lot of reasons they don't love our data. Some of the reasons is that we don't have randomized control trials, right? The NHS just washes their hands of us, saying, you don't have randomized control trials. We're not paying for that. And we say, you can't really randomize autistic 2-year-olds into intensive or non-intensive interventions, right? People don't consent to that sort of randomization. They're like, well, you don't have randomized control trials. Sorry, we're not paying for that. It just hasn't convinced anybody, right? So if we're going to grow our field, sure, we need our data, right? I'm not trying to talk down the data, but the data's not enough. Okay, we have to convince the people who commission the services that behavior analysis is valuable and it's ethical and it's safe. Okay, and we're not going to do that with our graphs and our data alone. Okay, and if we think back to, if we look at, so you know who's really good at this is OBM. One of my favorite bits when we listen to people who practice OBM is they say right up front, nobody needs OBM, right? You know, OBM, organization and behavior management, comes into organizations with the grace of the people commissioning it, right? So when we look at some of the history of what's going on in OBM, they have a foundational principle that practitioners operate at the invitation of the clients. Okay, so that practitioners need to essentially sell their services, right? They need to be good salespeople and sell something that people want to buy that's good value. Okay, and this is what we see of practice in the United Kingdom as well, that where provision exists, it exists where practitioners have demonstrated their value as effective members of multidisciplinary teams. And when I said earlier, where's ABA growing in the United Kingdom? Well, it's growing in adult health and social care. Okay, what does an ABA practitioner do in adult health and social care? Well, I will tell you, they work with doctors and psychologists and social workers and people in care, and they consult with the person that they're supporting and their family, and they are a member of a team that's establishing a service. Okay, when behavior analysts work in schools, they work with teachers and speech and language therapists and psychologists and occupational therapists, and they work as a multidisciplinary team. They contribute to a wider group. Okay, where behavior analysts aren't growing and thriving as well is where they work in isolation. So when we say, oh, look, no, I got this, this is early intervention, this is all me, I'm going to work it out. trust me, you see my graph, it's beautiful. We haven't seen the growth there. Okay, so we need to be embedding ourselves into systems that already exist. Okay, we need people to invite us to the table. We need to make ourselves valuable, right? So we need to be delivering behavior science in a way that is useful to the people who are commissioning it. And this is just a really different situation than what practitioners in North America find themselves in now. Okay, so we think about what's happening in North America and what the BACB ethics code and whole systems are supporting is an environment where there's already demand. Okay, and I remember it wasn't like that in the beginning. I was around. I was paying attention, but that's where they are now. Okay, and our trajectory has been different. And so, what we're looking at to grow the field in the UK is to create a profession that fits in the UK context. Okay, and this isn't hard. We have all the skills for this, right? We just forget sometimes. So I will tell you something that you already know if you're on Behavior Live. Applied behavior analysis is the process of applying behavioral principles to socially significant behavior to produce meaningful improvement while demonstrating that the intervention itself was responsible for the change. Okay, so we have using behavior science on matters of social importance. The science of behavior is so beautiful. And I'm sure you're with me because we're here on Behavior Live. I don't have to convince you. But I love it. I mean, you love it too, right? It's gorgeous and simple. And if we're completely honest, it's a description, right? It describes something true. It describes something true about the universe. So behavior is more likely to happen when it is reinforced, right? And if that behavior is in certain antecedent conditions, some consequences will be more desirable than they are in other antecedent conditions. Okay. And so the job of the behavior analyst, the applied behavior analyst, is just to be super curious and say, what's the behavior I'm interested in? What's maintaining that behavior? What are the consequences that maintain it? Under what stimulus conditions is this behavior more or less likely to happen? That's all it is, right? So the science of behavior is simple and elegant, and it describes something true about the world. And it applies equally to all the living creatures on planet Earth. We are all governed by these rules of behavior. And again, I know you're already with me, but sometimes I think we just make too much of this. Okay, we make too much of it. Okay, behaviors happen because they make sense to the person. The behavior that is happening makes more sense at this very moment than any other behavior. And to understand behavior, we need to understand why it makes sense in this exact moment. Okay, that's all it is. I use this slide for every talk I give, right? If I'm teaching support workers who have never, ever, ever heard of behavior analysis or have heard about it and thought it's evil, and talking to you guys as well, I think it's enormously important to remember the simplicity and truth of the science we already have. Okay, so behavior science can be used to understand and improve outcomes in many different situations. And I mean, we're the custodians of this science, right? We're very small. There aren't that many of us, but we get to hold it, and we're responsible for it, right? We've inherited this knowledge. It's a glorious, profound knowledge, and we are responsible for sharing it, okay, and for using it, and for using it to improve outcomes in so many different situations. It's an enormously powerful gift, this knowledge and insight that we have as behavior practitioners. The practice of behavior science, behavior analysis, requires judgment about how to use the science. The science is simple, it is true. Okay. But how we use that, well, I mean, we can use it for evil. Like, let's be honest, we totally can use it for evil, because we understand how to change behavior, right? It's really controlling. I mean, don't get me wrong, right? I mean, right? we're interested in changing people's behavior. That is controlling. Right? Who are we? Who are we to decide what should be changed and how to change it? And if people do, we make people uncomfortable because we can change their behavior, and it's right to be uncomfortable. Okay, so we have this glorious science. We're the custodians of the science, but we also have a moral and ethical imperative to use the science for good. How do we do that? Okay, sometimes I think we lose track of the simplicity of the science. Okay, and at least this happens in the UK. This has happened twice to me this week. In this week alone, 2 times, and it's only Wednesday. I have stumbled upon early intensive behavior interventions that were rote. Okay, so people had done an assessment of a young autistic child, colored in the boxes of their VB map, and started writing programs where the primary reinforcement was coloring the next box on the VB map. Is this the right goal for this particular child? Sometimes, not always. Are discrete trials the best way to carry on? Sometimes, not always. I spoke to a behavior analyst this week who was going to die on the hill of errorless learning being the most important fundamental thing we'd ever done. I'm like, I'm not sure the data backs that up, right? There's practice. We have our science and we have our practice, and there's a billion ways to practice. And sometimes we get stuck. Okay. So sometimes we keep doing the same thing over and over again because we get stuck in our procedures rather than remembering the sort of the elegance and sort of infinite possibilities of our science. I work in OBM. I do lots of work in airports right now. We're doing work to improve safety on the runway, which is really fun. And I get to ride around in cars near the airplanes and see what's going on, which is thrilling. And it's thrilling to use my science, right? I am the custodian of the science, and look, I'm using it like to improve safety outcomes at the airport, right? How lucky am I to get to do that? So lucky, right? But if I look at the history of OBM and behavior-based safety, well, it's pretty consequence heavy. I mean, let's be honest, right? So behavior-based safety, there's been some offshoots. There's some exciting things happening, but by and large, they're talking a lot about. They call it R plus and R minus, which I sort of love and sort of hate all at the same time. There's not a lot of nuance. Here's an intervention. Insert into organization, run this intervention, make a few tweaks. It's not particularly nuanced. We can lose track of the individual. We need to make sure that behavior analysis is applied well. And how do we do that? Okay. What I want to talk to you is about the importance of professional regulation and making sure that our field is healthy and has room to grow. And it has room to grow in lots of different ways. So how are we doing that in the United Kingdom? Okay, so we have the UK Society for Behavior Analysis, which is a voluntary board. So I'm currently the president of that board. Everybody on that board volunteers our time. Okay, we have at this point over 1,000 members, which is really exciting. We have 1,000 registered behavior analysts in the UK. And 2001, maybe there are 600 people registered with the BACB. There still are 600 British people registered with the BACB. But there's 1,000 people registered in the UK, and that's growing. Okay, most of our members are elected, and some are appointed, and I think we've got about 15 members. The sort of number, the numbers ebb and flow. And we have 1.5 full-time administrative staff. We are really small. And I tell you this because if you're living in a country that's still doing this, it takes a lot of goodwill. So we are growing this profession in the United Kingdom and regulating it with the volunteer time of our board members. Okay, and we are doing all of it. We are writing the policy, we're doing the ethics, we're managing the complaint committees, we're answering the emails. Okay, our bank balance is slowly getting healthier, but goodness gracious, it is not. I don't know. It's a lot of work. Okay, and we are not anywhere near a point where we start to like pay our board and have lots of full-time staff. Okay, our only revenue is a conference that we have every year and our membership fees, and this about covers our expenses right now. So it's incredibly important that you remember that this is a voluntary board, and it's a labor of love from the entire ABA community. Okay. The mission statement of the UK-SBA is to act in the public interest by setting and upholding standards for the competent, safe, ethical, and values-led practice underpinned by the science of behavior analysis. And I'm going to tell you our mission statement because I was one of those people for years who are like, who needs a mission statement? That's just words. Let's do action. I'm a behavior analyst. Sure, you got your verbal behavior, but let's just get on with it. And our old mission statement before we got really busy was to be the home of behavior analysis in the UK. And that was a huge mission statement. So remember, we're a voluntary board, right? We're all just donating our time. I do my UK-BA stuff like in between the jobs that people pay me to do while trying to, be a mom and run a house and do my job. So when we were the home of behavior analysis, we were feeling like we had to respond to negative media coverage in the UK. Our members were asking us if we could help them manage professional disputes. And sometimes we said yes, and sometimes we said no, but mostly we felt pulled in a lot of directions. And so a primary guiding principle of our board right now is tight mission, right? What can we reasonably do? We're behavior analysts. Can we set ourselves behavior goals that are actually achievable rather than trying to be the home of everything ABA in the UK? So here's what we do. We set and uphold the standards for competent, safe, ethical, and values-led practice. That's all we do right now, okay? And I'm going to tell you how we do it. People want lots more. There's so much love for our field. And I think we will see more professional organizations growing up soon who will take on other roles, bits of maybe advocacy for practice or professional organizations to support behavior analysts, things like that. But we set the standards. Okay, so as I told you, in 2000, the BACB announced that they would stop certifying people in 2002. We were given an extension. So the UK and Australia both had extensions until the end of, I think ours was at the end of 2025. Australia might still be in a grace period a lot. I don't know. Don't, I'm not your source on that one. But we had until the end of 2025 where people could still qualify as BCBAs. And that was because there were two reasons for that. One was our legal systems were similar enough that the BACB felt confident that they could continue to regulate practice in the UK. And the other reason was because we had a voluntary board and a credible pathway for certification. Okay, we were already organized. And so we were able to take our first steps towards professional regulation really quickly. The BACB did give us a small bit of money as well to help with that. I'm going to say that because I'm going to make fun of them later. And the UK-SBA at this point in 2000, this was a very funny period of time. So the BACB made their announcement that they were no longer certifying people and the whole world was going to lock down 3 months later. And in that 3-month period, we all managed to meet in London a couple of times and set up 2 task forces to recommend certification standards. It was a most unusual year. Okay, the first task force was an academic task force, and we brought together academics from all the universities who taught ABA and asked them to help us set a curriculum. the important decisions we made at this point were that we wanted the curriculum to fit into UK universities. The BACB at this point had rolled out the 5th task list, which has become the 6th task list, which actually didn't quite fit into UK university master's courses, right? So we were really arguing with our universities on tuition and how to teach this many credits. And it had ceased to become a good fit. So this was a great opportunity for us to design a course that actually worked for our universities. And UK universities do a lot more regulation of courses than they do in North America. Okay, so this group of people recommended curriculum standards, and it was externally validated by a panel of UK experts. And this felt relatively easy. Okay, so this piece of work, we had some lovely meetings. It was all very convivial, a few bit of edits, and we agreed our curriculum standards. UK universities can now apply to become verified course sequences of the UK-SBA. We also started a supervision task force, and this could have been a very easy project. We could have just rolled over and taken the BACB standards, but we didn't. Okay, this is where we really diverge from the crowd in the UK. We brought together professionals from all disciplines, and we asked them the questions: what are the skills that behavior analysts need to practice competently, ethically, and to grow the field? Okay, and this was revelatory. Okay, so what they told us was behavior analysts are very, very good at behavior analysis. They can do a functional assessment, they can prompt, they can teach, they can graph. Oh, the graphs are beautiful, right? We're good, we're technically excellent. Where we're not so good was that multidisciplinary and collaborative working. Okay, we weren't very good at working with other professionals. We weren't very good at not speaking in jargon. We don't make people feel smart and comfortable when we show them our graph. Like, look how smart we are. Look how good our intervention is. That was putting people off. Okay, they don't like us. And people would tell me that they come at me with all these graphs, and I don't understand it, and I hate them. I don't like that. I don't understand it, right? So we weren't doing a very good job of selling our services. We needed to improve our soft skills. So we are very good at training technically competent behavior analysts. We weren't necessarily training people on the soft skills, clinical skills, how to get along with other people. Okay. And so we needed to do that. We needed to teach those skills and ensure that our behavior analytics students were going into practice with the skills they need to work effectively and grow the field. Because if we can grow the field, then we're doing our jobs as the custodian of this beautiful science to improve the lives of lots of different people, right? But so we needed to think, what are the skills we need? We need to grow experts. We needed to grow expert behavior analysts, not just expert scientists, but expert practitioners as well. So how do we become experts? Okay, so most of us were trained, unless we're very new to the field, with the assumption that expertise is acquired through hours of practice, which is sort of a wildly stupid idea for behavior analysts, right? You would never say, I'm going to teach this young kid with autism, or I'm going to improve uh, the employment skills of this adult with a learning disability, and well, just give them, let's just book out 50 hours, and whatever happens at the end will be fine. Okay, so most skills improve with time, but time is not the mechanism by which skills improve. We need to teach people stuff, right? This is not a wild idea. We're behavior analysts. We are totally on board with what are we teaching in supervision. Okay, so what we've done is we've taken a constructional approach. And the constructional approach is an idea by Israel Golddiamond. It was a very influential paper in the United Kingdom as people with learning disabilities were leaving residential settings and from institutions and moving into homes. And it was this idea that we're going to teach, it's just skill building. We're going to teach people skills. Okay, we're not just interested in reducing challenging behaviors, we're interested in teaching skills, right? So we're going to use this with our professionals. We're going to meet them where they are. What are their skills? What are their strengths and weaknesses? And how do we teach and reinforce the skills required to become an expert behavior analyst? Do we know what makes an excellent practitioner? And are we explicitly teaching that? Because I'll be honest, I didn't always do that in my duration supervision. Sometimes I got to the end of the month and I'd done some supervision. And so I signed off on my hours with my trainees. And you do enough of those months in a row, and yet at the end of it, I'm still not that confident in their skills, but I'd signed off on their hours, right? Could I not sign up? We did the hours. They hadn't gotten better, right? Do I sign them off? So what we adopted instead was a competence framework. Okay, what are the skills behavior analysts need? And we put that competence framework into 3 core values. So this is a value-led framework, because remember, the science of behavior, beautiful, elegant, describes stuff. The practice of behavior analysis requires judgment. So in the UK-SBA is the judge. We, as a community, come together as volunteers to decide what's the judgment. Okay, so value 1 is that we are committed to understanding individuals. We promote collaborative partnerships that are respectful of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we ensure that the goals, methods, and outcomes of any intervention are important to and understood by and created with the individuals and their advocates. We don't just do stuff to people. I'm not going to turn up with my BB map and run you through it because that's what I do. Okay? I'm not going to come in with my behavior-based safety and just insert it in your organization. I'm going to work with you to develop something that's meaningful to you. My expertise is using the science of behavior to improve outcomes. I'm not necessarily the best judge of what the best outcome is, right? I'm an expert in changing behavior, but I'm not an expert in what's the best outcome for everybody in every situation, right? So I'm going to work with those people and find out what's important to them. We take this constructional approach, which means that we prioritize skill building is our number 1 foundational principle. We understand the starting point and work to extend knowledge and skills to achieve meaningful outcomes. And we are committed to advancing the field. We actively pursue conversations. We remain curious, and we change when we get new information. This one's hard too, right? This one's hard. I think I've done some practice of behavior analysis 25 years ago that I'm not very proud of right now, if I'm really honest. I've listened to people, I've listened to autistic people, and I wouldn't practice that way anymore. Okay? I remain curious, I stay open to new information, and I change, right? I'm not going to get stuck in delivering the same old ABA intervention because that's what we do. Okay? We're not going to keep doing the same thing just because we've always done it. Okay, so what are the skills that are needed to become an expert behavior analyst? Well, this we decided as a community. So everybody came together and we agreed on the skills we need to become expert behavior analysts. So first of all, we have the technical skills, okay? These are described by their topography. They're taught in our master's courses, right? You learn this in the uni, but we all know that there's a big jump between verbal behavior and actual behavior. And so we want to see these skills, technical skills, demonstrated in practice. These are generally pretty easy. Everybody's on board with that. We're all super comfortable. I know when you've done prompt fading correctly, tick it off your competence chart. We also have these practice skills, and these make behavior analysts uncomfortable, okay? Because we cannot topographically define them. People need to be able to build a good relationship, and I cannot write you a definition of how to do that where 2 people would agree that it happened if they both observed it and could mark the onset and the offset of that behavior. Can't do it, right? There's a million ways to build a good relationship. And if I taught you one and told you that was it, you'd be weird, right? We need experts at building good relationships. We need effective communicators, and we need people who are culturally sensitive. And we sort of call this the art of the practice, or the soft skills, or the non-technical skills. And we're going to start demanding that our behavior analysts demonstrate these before we certify them. Okay. How do we do that? What do experts do? Okay. So experts identify the relevant discriminative stimuli in their environment. They choose the best strategy for that context, and they achieve the desired outcome. Okay. So what we are going to do is we are going to look for outcomes here. We are going to want our students to be able to identify, in this situation, I can tell that this person doesn't like my intervention. They're not happy with what I'm doing, or they don't understand it, or they're not following my program, right? What are the interpersonal strategies that I need to employ to get the outcome I want? Okay, so these are mostly outcome focused measures, but what we're looking for are practitioners who can use different strategies in appropriate contexts. Okay, so if we want more experts, we could just give it lots of time, hope that the supervisors are sensitive enough to point out these relevant contingencies, because some supervisors are and some of them aren't. Or we use a constructional approach and train them directly in the skills we want them to see. Okay, and this is where the UK-SBA competence framework comes in. We have 80 something, 85 maybe, 85 different knowledge and skill items that we expect students to demonstrate over the course of their supervision. Okay, so some of these are technical skills. We want to see them use a range of methods to determine functional relations. Some of them identify aspects of the environment that positively contribute to behavior change. This isn't a very jargony document. We keep the jargon in our university curriculum. Our applied work, we're trying to use more everyday language. We also have soft skills, okay? We want to see people evaluate their own practice. We want them to engage in self-care activities so that we're not burning out all of our behavior analysts. They need to be able to describe the importance of listening and compassionately reflecting on critiques of behavior analysis. So if somebody comes at you and says behavior analysts are evil, and that does happen in the UK, especially if you go on social media. How do we respond to that? If we respond with, no, you're wrong, look at my graphs, we're probably not going to get them on board. How do we listen? How do we respond compassionately? How do we change minds? Okay. Do we have the skills to be doing that as a profession? Okay. We then ask our supervisees and our supervisors to identify the context and the strategies that make experts in practice. So we're going to want to be creating these essentially natural environment training opportunities for our supervisees to demonstrate these skills, to discuss it with us, to reflect upon it. And only then when we see them do we tick them off and decide that yes, they are competent. Okay, this all leads us to what we call the UK-BA cert, which is our master's level qualification. And I just have to tell you this story because I tell everybody this story because it also tells you some of the context of setting up a qualification post 2020. As we'd had a different name at some point, and the BACB phoned us up and pointed out that they owned the copyright on the letters BACB, BCABA, and RBT in the United Kingdom. They'd owned it for some time, and they were prepared to legally enforce that copyright. Aren't they charming? So we had to, and this is all, so we can't call our curriculum a task list because the BACB has copyrighted it. We can't call our pathways have to be routes. We have all these different language. So the UK-BA cert is our master's level qualification. Okay, to be a UK-BA cert, a person needs a master's degree in behavior analysis on our curriculum, or an ABAI curriculum is fine. We're happy to accept those. They must complete their supervision standards over 5 years, and they can sign up for competence a month. They must have 2 supervision sessions each month, and then they submit 2 case studies to us At the end of their supervision, one to increase behavior, one to decrease behavior. We do not have an exam. Okay, there are a lot of reasons we do not have an exam. There is an argument that I could talk for a whole nother hour on how a competence framework doesn't lend itself to a knowledge-based exam. That is true. The other fact is it is not practical for the UK-SBA to have an exam. Okay, the exam culture in the United Kingdom requires lots of accommodations for people with learning disabilities and neurodiversity, so we would have a very hard time with a multiple choice exam. It's incredibly expensive to run and validate exams. We would have to publish and demonstrate those, and it's a barrier. I want to remind you that we're a voluntary board with a really small budget. Okay, that exam would have eaten up most of our budget. So we do not have an exam at this time. We are keeping that under review for now. I said you could get me on a different day and I'll be really pro exam or not having an exam. Mostly, I don't miss it. I think that a knowledge-based exam does not necessarily capture the skills that make a good behavior analyst in every condition, but keep your eye on this space over the next 20 years, and we'll see how that goes. We have our competence framework. We also have intermediate level behavior analysts. Now, this is a very interesting category because essentially what we have in the United Kingdom are a lot of vocational qualifications. And these are often people with, they might have a PhD in something, but they take a work-based qualification in positive behavior support. And these people run health boards and schools, and they do amazing and incredible work. Okay, but they don't have master's degrees in behavior analysis. And we're inviting them in to become intermediate behavior analysts. And they take supervision from a UK-SBA cert twice a month. They agree to our ethics code. They agree to our complaints panel so we can regulate their practice. This was a slightly controversial move in behavior analysis circles because a lot of people who have these qualifications maybe haven't had the same technical training that behavior analysts have done, yet they're also the people who are practicing, and there's more of them than there are of us. So we're inviting them into the field because we believe their contributions are important, and also because then we can regulate that profession and keep it safe for everybody. Okay, and we have not yet released our standards for the UK vocational behavior analyst, and that will be just maybe perhaps a 2-day course. We have professional regulation with an organization called the Professional Standards Authority. This is a government body that recognized the UK-SBA and give us permission to hold our register. They oversee, we are audited by them every year. We have to meet their standards, which includes ethical, cultural, and sort of technical standards of practice, also a robust complaints procedure. It was a very, very difficult process for us to become PSA certified. There was a public invitation to people if they thought behavior analysis should be certified, and an overwhelming majority of people who wrote in said, yes, absolutely, behavior analysis is fabulous, it changed my life, it's gorgeous. And a few people wrote in and said, oh no, it's the worst thing ever. Right? And we had to address those comments that say, oh no, it's the worst thing ever. Okay, we have to compassionately respond to that. And that is appropriate for us to have to do, right? And if we can't convince the PSA, we can't convince everybody. And if we can't meet those standards, how are we going to grow our field? Okay, so we have this process to become PSA regulated. This was profoundly difficult. It took 2 years and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of volunteer hours from the board to meet paperwork. It continues to be one of the biggest regulatory systems that we face as a board, and it's the best thing we've ever done because it gives us the stamp of legitimacy. We are a recognized profession. Now, we are not a mandatory board. There's no mechanism in the UK right now to be a profession that says if you're a behavior analyst, you have to be registered with the UK-SBA. And this is a worry, okay? But there's nothing we can do. There's no pathway open to us for that right now. So as a board, we're closely monitoring that situation. And as soon as an opportunity becomes available to become a mandatory register, we will be ready for that, and start looking for that sort of accreditation. And that's how we really protect our field, is then you have to be registered as a behavior analyst. I am running a little bit over. I notice I will speed up, but there's not too much longer. We require people to demonstrate safety. Okay, so we do police checks. We have a consumer advisory panel. We require all of our members to hold insurance and take safeguarding. These are statutory UK standard policies for people who work in health and social care and education. We also run a complaints panel. Okay, so if a member is complained about, we run a panel. And again, these are very, very time consuming. We have over the years had to strike a few people off of our register, which on one hand is devastating. It's devastating. It also means that it's working. Okay, so that people who don't practice to our ethics code cannot stay on our register, and this enhances consumer safety and protects our field, safeguards our science, keeps everybody safe. Our ethical standards explicitly address some of the contextual issues in the United Kingdom. Okay, so as I told you, a huge barrier to ABA is ideological objections from the neurodiversity community. Okay, so we address those in our ethics code. And here, registrants do not support efforts to suppress self-regulatory behaviors, except in rare cases when the behavior poses harm or significant risks to well-being. Okay, so what we're saying here is it is against our ethical code to target self-stimulatory behaviors for reduction just to make a person look more neurotypical. Were people practicing like that? I don't think very often. But what it does do is, one, we draw a line in the sand. We don't do this. Two, when people say, oh, behavior analysis is really mean, they're just trying to normalize autistic people. We like, actually, it's in our ethics code. So if you know a behavior analyst who's doing that, let us know and we'll investigate. Okay, so this is one of the ways, one, that we protect consumers from practice that we know they don't want, and two, we protect our field. This is our defense, right? So if we are regulating the profession of behavior analysis, we are the custodians of behavior science, we keep the field safe, we grow the field. The science of behavior analysis is a description. The practice requires judgment. Our judgment says we do not suppress self-regulatory behaviors except in rare cases when the behavior poses harm or a risk to well-being. If somebody does otherwise, they can't be on our register, okay? We have explicit standards about neurodiversity, assent and consent, and consequences. We respect and value neurodivergent identities. We advocate for acceptance and understanding of neurodiversity. I totally believe this is just the right thing to do. It is a privilege and a joy over the years to have been able to know so many autistic people and been able to help them achieve the things they want to achieve. I categorically, without reservation, advocate and celebrate neurodiversity. Okay, it's in our ethics code, and it's also the right thing to do. Okay, registrants only support individuals in pursuit of change of behaviors that are meaningful to them. We don't select goals independently. I'm not going to tell you that you need to stop doing this unless you want to. I am not trained in best outcomes. I'm trained in the science of behavior, right? I want to do what's important to you. I don't decide on my own. Okay, and the ethics code is huge, and we're constantly reevaluating our ethics code and making updates to it. A core value of our board that's discussed in every committee meeting is respect for equity, diversity, and inclusion. We're committed to advancing practice and protecting consumers and members. We are constantly in every committee reflecting upon racial diversity and neurodiversity, and how do we use our judgment and our practice of our science to ensure that our practice is inclusive. All of this sums up to the fact that I think that if we're going to grow our field, and as the custodians of this beautiful, beautiful science, right? And the practice of applied behavior analysis, professional regulation is the most important tool we have to grow the field and protect the consumer. And what becomes incredibly important in that is that it is context dependent. So when the BACB sets standards, those are standards for the North American context, and they make a lot of sense in the North American context. We needed a different set of standards in the UK to ensure that our practitioners have the skills they need to grow the field in this context, and that our ethics code reflects the practice realities in the United Kingdom. Okay, so that is the end of my talk today. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm happy to take questions if anybody has any.
Hi, Maggie. Thank you so much. That was eye-opening and also entertaining and so true, so true. We have a couple of questions. You mentioned, I think there's three questions altogether. Just briefly, you mentioned earlier that you think ABA is expensive. What do you think makes it expensive?
I think it depends on where we're looking. I think because it is not standard practice, it's something that gets added on, right? So if we're looking at early intensive intervention, we know that those can be expensive because now we have, when it's taught one-to-one, in the UK, most young children are not staffed in their schools at one-to-one. Okay, so a typical staffing ratio might be 9 children in a class with 4 staff. So if we're looking at more traditional applications of ABA with young children with autism, especially intensive ones, there's just more staffing bills to pay, I would say. And I think that's the only real expense. And a lot of my work over the years has been how do we um, accommodate early intervention in the financial realities of maintained schools, right? So that's actually been my passion project, and continues to be for years, is how do we creatively deliver intervention that fits in the structures, the systems, and the budgets of local authorities
Mm.
and the
That
NHS.
that makes a lot of sense. Mostly the staff costs because the staff that are working with these kids routinely that are already paid are not necessarily trained in behavior analysis. They're
Yes,
trained in all sorts of, well, other maybe they have some of the teaching assistants might not have an awful lot of training. They might have some training, but
yes,
not an awful lot of training, and certainly not
yes.
in behavior analysis. That makes a lot of sense. Um, Can you just, another question, can you just remind us on the dates? I wasn't quite sure because I think the slides were a bit confusing. The dates that the UK-SBA regulation of the profession came into force and how those work.
The PSA was approved in, I think it was January 2002 was when we announced the PSA approval. So that is when we had the
2002, you
PSA.
mean 2002?
2022. You're right.
That's what
I
I'm thinking.
often do that. I'm absolutely terrible with dates, and especially the tens place. Yeah, no, 2022. 4 years. It's been
22,
4
that's
years.
what I was thinking because it was 20 it said 2002 and I was sort of thinking, hang
You
on a
know,
minute,
it would
that's
have, and
20
I'm
years
so
ago.
sorry that was
No,
I
that's
wouldn't even
okay.
see that
No,
mistake. That's why I
no
needed an
problem.
editor
Just to
in
be sure that
advance.
that's recorded properly.
2022. It's
Yeah.
only been 4 years that we've had professional regulation, and that was the same year we launched the UK-BA cert as well.
Oh, brilliant. Brilliant.
Both
Thank you.
happened in January of
Yeah.
2022.
And the final question, I know we're running a little over here. The final question, loving the focus of the soft skill, on the soft skill in the final session that you,
Hmm.
section on supervision. But how do you teach these behaviors to somebody or these soft skills to somebody who just doesn't get it?
It's really hard, isn't it? I think. I mean, I think for what the model that we're developing, at least in my practice, and we're thinking quite hard about this, is I think often starting with a few rote strategies. And there's some gorgeous papers on this right now. Someone just recently published something in applied behavior analysis about how to train staff to kindly conduct interviews, right? So I think a novice might start with a script, right? and they use that script a few times. And what we can do explicitly is to start pointing out the SDs for when the script might be appropriate, and having them reflect upon, almost like a task analysis, what's the social feedback they're getting in that moment. Do they need to change their approach? Do they need to do something different? And I think what it opens up is the conversation, right? I think I often, and I think this might not be true in North America, but I think it is true in the UK, is that people would often avoid having these conversations because they're hard to say. Like, well, actually, I think the way that when you spoke to that teacher, they didn't seem very relaxed. I don't feel like they're going to do what you were recommending because you didn't, your approach with them, you hadn't established the right relationship with them first. And so essentially telling someone you weren't very likable in that moment, right? And so that's hard feedback to give. And so I think because we're explicitly saying you have to have those conversations, that's already a huge step up, right? And we're saying this is important to us, and we want you to reflect upon it.
Yeah. I mean, I know in social work, they have these suitability interviews before you get training, and some people are just not suitable for the profession as such. But we are behavior analysts. We believe in behavior change. So
that's right. We should be able to teach these things. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I mean, people pick them up anyway, whether they pick them up before they meet with us or afterwards. These are taught behaviors. So
absolutely. And it's funny, isn't it, that for years we just accepted this idea: 1,500, 2,000 hours, you'll get what you need. We'll trust that with enough time you'll be expert, without actually thinking, what do you need to be expert in?
Yeah. Well, that's a couple of questions. And Maggie, thank you so much from the European Association for Behaviour Analysis, and for me personally, it was really an eye opener, and I think a really important talk for not only for the UK, because obviously in the UK, the UK-SBA has done a mammoth task to achieve this, but we know that right across Europe there are very few places. There are very many places that are working on this. Very few places have achieved it so far. And our job in the European Association would be then to link the countries that have achieved it, to see if we can get some social mobility for behavior analysts across countries. That would be my dream. Would be the next step once a number of countries have achieved professional regulation. You have pointed out the importance of that beautifully in your talk today, and I totally agree with that. That is one of the key things that our field has to achieve in Europe and across the world, of course, further afield. The US has led the way, but we can't. No country can be regulated by a foreign country, and the US is the foreign country for the UK. Even so, we might be friends and we can learn from each other. Ultimately, legally, the jurisdiction you can only regulate a profession within your own jurisdiction, which is the important point as well. So thank you very much, and I hope to see
thank
you
so
very
much
soon.
for having me and inviting me along.
Okay, thanks very much, and all the very best. Okay, bye.